All right. We have Aman here. He's rejoining as a panelist. Hey, Aman. Hey, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good too. Thanks. Thanks for taking time for this. We have 20 folks with us already, and a lot of them are still joining us as we speak. How's your Wednesday
Wonderful.
so far?
Good. Can't complain here in Boston.
I saw that you reopened your Boston flagship store. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. We did. Yeah, we love, we generally, as we'll talk about here in today's discussion, enjoy retail as much as we can of it. But I think in general, it's nice to have it at the store. In fact, this morning,
Are you
just
at the
getting to
store
see
right now?
people. I'm not. I'm just in our office now.
Okay.
It's about a block that way. So
Nice.
uh,
Oh, awesome.
getting to talk to people, see people, and hear customers' reactions, see their interactions with products is just so wonderful, even for online sales. There's a lot of translation.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get into that into more detail. So we'll get started. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining in. I'm Nisarg. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO at Affable.ai. At Affable, we help D2C brands find, manage, and measure their social media influencers. We started Affable around 4 years ago to help any size of business scale their customer acquisition through influencers. And now, with more than 100 brands using our product over 20 countries, we have two offices, one in San Francisco, California, and another in Singapore in Asia. And we started this webinar series specifically for D2C founders, marketeers who are looking at ways to grow their businesses. Before we get started and before I introduce Aman, a few housekeeping. One, this is being recorded, as you might have encountered when you started Zoom. If you have any questions during the conversation, please feel free to put them under the Q&A, and we'll curate and ask these questions to Aman. This will be a 45-minute webinar. I have some questions prepared for the first 30 odd minutes, and we'll have 15 minutes of a Q&A with attendees for any all questions you have. With that, a quick introduction of Aman. Aman is the CEO of Ministry of Supply. At Ministry of Supply, Aman and his team are using amazing scientific techniques with innovative materials and designs for creating everyday clothing. Thanks, Aman, for joining us today. And I can't do justice of introducing you in the way you would do that. So can I request you to just share about yourself and Ministry of Supply for everyone in the audience?
Yeah, I think you actually did a wonderful job, and I'm also grateful to be here and want to first extend the thanks to you and your team for inviting me to join you all here today. But the quick kind of summary, we're Boston-based company, as I mentioned here. Started 9 years ago. The entire premise really hasn't changed since we started. The kind of why or the deeper purpose of the brand has been, and for as long as we can help it, will always be to use the power of science and technology and engineering to change how we think of clothing. So how can we make the most comfortable clothing on and for the planet using this toolkit that we've built over years of kind of tumbling out what's best for the customer, what's best for our process. So I think men's and women's clothing, super soft, stretchy, machine washable, all of the potency and comfort of your pajamas, gym clothes, leisure clothes, but applied to much more presentable silhouettes that you could wear in front of or with anyone in any situation.
I'm assuming you're wearing a Ministry of Supply shirt right now.
I am. It's hard to catch me not wearing a Ministry of Supply head to toe, even on the weekends. Only because I choose to, not because I have to. I think that's the goal. Is clothing that you actually we often kind of more softly say it's clothing that you look forward to wearing, right? It's clothing that you don't dread on a Monday morning or rip off on a Friday night.
It's amazing. How did you come up with the concept of Ministry of Supply, and why is it called Ministry of Supply?
Two very good questions. The first one I'll say is that we have, when we started the company, it was actually purely to solve personal problems. So as a personal background, I was in consulting prior to coming back to business school. Every Monday morning, every Thursday night, I was getting on and off a flight. And it was just terrible. I was wearing this kind of Brooks Brothers uniform, and nothing against the company specifically, but it was this idea of a kind of a broadcloth shirt that was untucked, wrinkled. I had to go, Sunday before even the flight, I had to go to the dry cleaner, pick it up. By the time I got to the client site, it was already kind of disheveled. Tuesday morning, I'd wake up in the hotel and have to hack a hotel iron and figure out how to, make this stuff work. And found that at 7 or 8 p.m., after I left the client site, would go back to a hotel and throw on my gym clothes, go back to the hotel lobby, meet with the other analysts, and we'd work till 1 or 2 a.m. And that's when all the real work got done. And so it's just kind of unlocked that a lot of people learned during the pandemic, that kind of being comfortable drove both joy and productivity. And so by being comfortable, if we could make people comfortable, not just from 7 p.m. onwards, that joy could extend everywhere else. So that was the opening premise of the brand. And from there, it was just as engineers by background and problem solvers, it was how do we kind of first hack these samples, cut up old products of other brands, connect them together with a couple of stitches, see if this concept works out. And then turns out if other people have this same problem too, we can kind of turn it into a business. But it very much started as just a personal problem that we wanted to solve.
And this was at MIT when you and Johan met and were just like working on 2 different products. I think you were stitching something with like socks, if I'm not wrong.
That's right. Yeah. We kind of this Franken products. We say, Johan was cutting out the center back panel of his dress shirts and actually cutting out a little piece of fabric from his running shirts, sewing this running material into the center back panel of his dress shirts. And so now if he's wearing a blazer or if somebody's not in front of him, you really couldn't tell. It was white and white. So it kind of blended nicely, but all of a sudden he could kind of go like this and no one else could even make that motion, right? We see often even today when we're in the store, somebody puts on a dress shirt, the first thing they do is go like that instinctively. They want to see, can they actually move? And I was doing the same thing with socks. I was cutting out the soles of dress socks and sewing in the soles of Nike Dry Fit kind of running socks to have this cushy, soft step. But visibly to anybody looking at me, the top of the sock, the piece that you might be able to see, looked like a dress sock. And so how can we create all the comfort and joy of these clothes that we looked forward to wearing, but incorporate that into the ones that we dreaded?
That's amazing. And why Ministry of Supply?
It's a great guy. I skipped. That's my favorite question. I skipped it.
I wanted to make sure you covered it. So I was like, I'm not going to leave that one out.
I like it. It's a good question. So I don't know if anyone on the call is a fan of Bond films, but Q, who makes all of Bond's gadgetry and special equipment and clothing when it's necessary. Q is actually based on a real person, Charles Fraser Smith. Charles Fraser Smith in World War II operated under the cover of now a defunct agency called the Ministry of Supply. And the goal for us is really, we want to be Q and Q's labs, spitting out products for you, who we think of as kind of some version of Bond. And so if we can be Q and kind of bake all this functionality really subtly and quietly and often secretly into the clothing that you wear to be prepared for whatever situation may come up with, kind of gala ready if that's necessary, but also who knows what comes at you and you can be ready for anything.
Oh, was that the first name, or did you always know that this is going to be the name, or whatever, like iterations?
No, it's funny. We had a couple other names that ended up, there's a lot of legal questions you have to think about when you're naming a company. If anybody on the call is going through this, they probably can relate with it. You kind of look at is the URL available? Have other companies claimed this? Would there be any kind of trademark infringements? We had to go through a few before we landed on this one, but when we got there, it felt right.
That's amazing. One of the themes of like today's webinar was acquisition of customers, right? And I read that you started with Kickstarter as your initial, like primary acquisition. Was it more validation that you were looking for, or was it like the initial customer acquisition?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it started as the first, right? It started for us just validation, right? I think we set a goal in that first month of saying, can we sell $30,000 for the product? And if so, we think there's something here. We think that enough other people have the same feeling as us. And we blew through that goal, and all of a sudden it became much more, what a great way to acquire new customers, right? People who want to join this journey with us. Still till today, we'll have people say, 9 years later, I'll say, hey, I backed your first Kickstarter. And there's a kind of badge of pride that folks will have, which I think is just wonderful, that they were, a part of the reason, and they very much are. It's an accurate depiction, a reason for us still being here today. So I do think it can serve both purposes, and that tends to be the case with any customer acquisition. It also validates that your problem statement is real and your solution is valid. So I think that the two can kind of pair well nicely together.
And you said that you were looking for $30,000, but you knocked it out of the park. What was the first Kickstarter campaign like results? In terms of the sales that you generated from it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have 430,000 ish
Oh,
in that first month. And it's interesting. I don't remember the exact number, but what I do remember the exact number is was 2,798 people, which is interesting. Now I'm thinking back, like I know that number exactly. To your point on customer acquisition, it's 2,798 people whom, if we treated properly and respectfully and gave them the product they asked for, would become our 2,798 best customers for the next 9 years. And I think for the most part that panned out, not necessarily because we nailed the product, which I think we didn't. We had a huge opportunity in hindsight to do better there, but because we treated them with the respect and great gratitude that they deserve for being the first 2,790 people to give us a shot. And I think that's such a critical part of any sort of customer acquisition journey, is making sure that people recognize that it's a two-way street, right? It's respect and trust being exchanged.
Yeah, and then you launched 2 other products on Kickstarter. So in total, you launched like 3 products, and I'm sure you've had like a lot of learnings. So if you were to like summarize your Kickstarter launch strategy within a few words, what would that be for a lot of D2C founders here?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I always like to say is nothing is organic about it. I mean, that was true in 2012. That's true in my most recent. We did 2012, 2013, and 2018, were the 3 years that we have done those campaigns, and that was true for all 3 of them. Right? It takes hard work. It takes seed planting. It takes calling upon your network, calling upon your customers, calling upon your friends. In later years, in the 2012 and 13, there were no ads. Now today in 2018, very much, a lot of it can be ad driven. So you have an ad strategy. And the second thing I'd say is making sure that it's both a great product and truly novel is important for that platform specifically. A great product is important for any platform, but in particular for crowdfunding, there is a genuine interest in people being in early to something novel and new. So even if it's new for you or for your company, that doesn't mean it's new for the market or your customer.
Right.
So kind of putting that filter on, is it truly something that's going to change? And that's why we didn't do it for 5 years. Right? We felt like 2018, we were launching a heated jacket, was the right time to go back to that platform and come back and lean on our Kickstarter backers that we knew could help us out.
That's amazing. And post your Kickstarter success, like at what point did you decide that now is the right time to open up a store? And correct me if I'm wrong, but the first store was the flagship store in Boston.
That's right. You're exactly right. Good. I'm impressed here. We actually, it's funny, we kind of are often lumped into kind of a group of e-commerce first or direct to consumer brands that were always just all about building on websites. Actually, our first sales were very much in person. We used to go to business school, we used to go to events and have trunk shows, and we loved it. I mean, the amount of conversation you would have at those instances, you'd have, so it's 20 transactions, you'd have one, but it lasted for 20 minutes. And that was so much more important, particularly in those early days, but even today, in building out a relationship with customers, but also getting that real feedback on the spot live that you can internalize and bring to market via your product. And so we actually, there was never a question on e-com versus stores. It was always good on both paths simultaneously. And that store, you're right, technically opened in 2014, but even in 2012, I think we rented a pop-up shop just down the street here for a week or 2 here and there. We'd go to events, do trunk shows. So it was not uncommon for us to be selling physically, hand-to-hand combat, building those relationships one by one. Again, today they still manifest, right? 9 years later, they still come back up. So I think planting that one-on-one groundwork is so important at any stage.
And did you have like a success right away with the first store, or what are some of the challenges in the earlier days which you did not anticipate with opening up of a store?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think there's kind of two different sides to that answer. One is absolutely kind of constant challenges and constant trying to figure out, retail it's a very different animal than e-com or wholesale, and understanding the means, everything from real estate and ADA law and hiring and training and education, right? That many of which challenges are not there on the e-com side. E-com has its own challenges, of course, but so certainly plenty of challenges that required constant iteration. That a couple of good advisors can help you skip a lot of those, but not everybody has that, and not everybody's ready for that. But I'd say on the other side, we were always grateful for what we got, right? I think in that sense, we didn't expect to be doing any of this, right? When we started the company, we were solving the problem for ourselves. So I think anything after that felt like all upside. So I think at the same time, it's certainly a challenging atmosphere. Retail has always been this great, you get to see it. You get to see this gem that you've polished and worked on coming to life.
You get to do more customer interviews in real time, where customers are walking into your store and you can just ask them questions, even if they don't buy anything.
Yeah, exactly. That conversation is just so invaluable.
Amazing. And just taking, fast track to 2020, you have, did you have like 7 stores at this point?
Pre-COVID 6, that's right. Yeah.
Pre-COVID 6. So 6 stores, COVID hits. What's going through your and your team members? What are the conversations you're having now?
Yeah, the first thing we did is we put up a sign. I remember even in all stores, but I still remember the Boston store because it's here. Put up a sign in the window saying we'll reopen in 2 weeks. Let the dust settle. And here we are now, almost 2 years later, right? And five of those six are still not open. So it's we can kind of smile about it now, but at the time that was a lot, right? So I think one of our first challenges, I think everyone's challenge, was really underestimating the power of how long this might last and its long-term impacts that it might have on not only the product, but also shopping behavior and as a result, channel strategy. So I think that was our first learning, was that those stores were not going to reopen in 2 weeks, and not in 2 months, and maybe not in 2 years. And that was a tough pill to swallow.
And how did you handle this? And this is like, as a founder, you have responsibilities of all these employees, the customers who are expecting, and then obviously your own pressure of all the goals and milestones that you've set for yourself. How did you manage this, abrupt international pandemic, and how did you manage yourself?
Yeah, we had a great piece of advice from one of our investors who said something to the tune of sunlight is the best disinfectant. And the idea there, while it has a bit of a negative take, is actually quite a positive one, which is the more you're open and transparent, there can be no issues, right? As long as everybody knows exactly what's happening. So what we found from the very beginning was don't hide anything, right? Share exactly what not only the actual circumstances, cash positions, raw emotions, all of that was very open. And so as we made decisions, we were very candid and clear about why those decisions were being made. We involved everybody in those decisions. And so ultimately we kept everybody employed working from home for a long period of time. But that retail staff, eventually, when we realized we just couldn't sustain these stores being open anytime soon, we were about to hit another winter of them being closed, had to have some tough conversations that we took very seriously.
Right. And when you realized that stores are going to be closed for a while, how did you then and this is my favorite part of the whole New York Times article, is like overhaul the business, photograph everything. What's the story?
Yeah, we in hindsight, I'm thinking about these long days or late nights, but decided that at some point midway through probably midway through last year that it was time to kind of really embrace this, right? And work with it, not against it, right? Find the tailwinds, not fight the headwinds. And so what we did is we changed everything we could, short, mid, and long term, right? So short term, that stuff like we switched every photo on the website, rewrote all the copy, style with more casual shoes. We had fortunately been building this company focused more on science than any specific aesthetic. So switching our pants, which are just as good for a pair of Oxfords or heels as they are for a pair of sneakers, photographs need to reflect that, right? So showing that versatility and photography in copy and how we present the product was the easiest short-term step. In the midterm, repurposing a lot of our products to think about how can we make products that are just slightly different from what we're making today, but much more relevant for a pandemic or post-pandemic life. And then long-term, revisiting our entire roadmap and thinking, do we want to wait for offices to reopen, or maybe the better strategy is actually to assume that they won't and actually build a product that is for anything really out of home or even to some degree in home that can take over kind of 24 hours of the day, head to toe, instead of 8 hours a day and a smaller portion of that. So broadening that aperture on what products we kind of gave ourselves permission to focus on. Made us not reliant on when offices would reopen.
So you did not focus on work from home products. You focused on products that, sure, could be worn for people who are working from home, but will also continue to be worn when they eventually go back to office.
Yeah, anywhere, right? Or if they eventually go back, right? Yeah, exactly. I think that's right. I think we kind of broadened that again to say we've often used the word work instead of office very intentionally, to say people will do work. There will be work being done, and in doing so, you tend to want to be presentable but also comfortable. So I think we kind of shifted the aesthetic to say it's not about offices, it's about work. And by choosing that word, we ourselves internally could rally around this idea of what is work appropriate or work comfortable, right? One of the things we talked a lot about is that everybody in this pandemic realized at the same time that comfort drives both joy and productivity. And,
Right.
and we've been saying that for 9 years, right? And all of a sudden everybody else figured it out at the same time. So we had this great opportunity for tailwinds.
And you've been selling through e-commerce as well as retail stores since you started, right? Or was it initially purely retail and then you added e-commerce angle to it?
Same time, really, right at the start.
Okay.
And I think it's actually been relatively stable on both fronts for until the pandemic. But yeah, absolutely the same time. I think for us, it's wherever that next best dollar or hour is spent, right? Less about we say all that innovation and energy is going to creating the best possible product and telling the strongest possible story around it. A channel strategy is just a product of whatever the customer pulls and wants. So some customers prefer shopping in person, others prefer shopping online. That's our strategy.
Amazing. Just talking about customer acquisition channels a bit more. You've been a big proponent of word of mouth, and word of mouth is a very wide array. It includes affiliates, influencers, and a bunch of other word of mouth channels. What are the successes you've had with word of mouth, influencers, affiliates in general, and any tips, tricks for the marketers in the audience?
Yeah, I think the first kind of success we had with that, and one lesson that we'll carry forward. In fact, we just watched a video about this recently. Was that the headline be consumable, palatable, almost pre-written? So in our earliest Kickstarter days, that was NASA and dress shirts, right? It was, what do those two things have in common, right? And so the headline kind of wrote itself. Or MIT students take on fashion, right? And allowing these kind of functional, right, machine washable suits. 3D printed masks, right? By kind of having these really pithy, concise headlines, that word of mouth becomes a lot easier for someone to convey versus if they're unable to give that quick product or brand rundown in 4 or 5 words, word of mouth becomes a lot more difficult, right? So I think before you even get to the how, I think the question is the what. And if you can answer that what question in 3 or 4 really punchy words, the rest of it becomes a lot easier.
That's some great advice. And in terms of, again, customer acquisition, what are some of the channels or experiments that have not worked so well for you? Are you able to highlight some of those as well?
Yeah, it's a tough one, and I imagine a lot of marketers on the call would relate with this, but it's a really difficult one to kind of, when you think about attribution, right, which is the magic word when it comes to any sort of marketing strategy, is properly associating the credit for a channel that gets right. We've done a number of offline, difficult to measure advertising. Last month we did a full page ad in the New York Times. It's a really difficult thing to isolate. What that impact is, because it's not digital. It's very difficult to attribute. So in that way, there is some level of gut that has to be involved in this. But I think in terms of deciding what didn't work, I imagine any impression is a good impression, right? As long as it's on brand. The question is, how does it contribute to your greater funnel or stack? And I tend, because of that, and many others would probably agree or disagree, but to focus on channels that are iterable and measurable, right? And so you can have that improvement opportunity to go after.
You've opened up your own stores, you've sold online. What are your thoughts on partnering with, and the reason I ask is a lot of D2C companies these days are selling through Walmart, CVS, Target, and the big box retailers. Do you have any strong opinions, or they're just like, what are your thoughts on selling and partnering through big box retailers today?
I think it's a wonderful idea for the right business, right? I think a couple of things to keep in mind there is price competition becomes an issue right now. You have to think about multiple channels selling the same product, which on your own channels, that's not something you have to think about. So whether those partners, I mean, we have long partnered with Stitch Fix, for example, where they are only selling full price. So there's no price competition there. There's no, for a while it wasn't even for sale. Now it is. And so for us, kind of thinking through that strategy, kind of making sure first and foremost we owned that customer relationship directly, we owned the authority over pricing was critical. And then the last thing I think about is making sure that your margins are in a spot to handle that, right? A lot of those folks are taking 50, 60 points right off the top. If your margins can't handle it, that will never change, right? Or if there's no plan for that to change, it won't naturally, Target's not going to automatically reduce their rates over time. In fact, if anything, they might increase them. So making sure that you have the right margins to go into that. But if you meet all those criteria, you're comfortable with all those truths, then it can be a wonderful way to grow and scale.
That makes sense. So we've spoken about 2012, 14 Kickstarter days. Spoke about COVID. What's next? What's next for Ministry of Supply?
Yeah, it's interesting in this kind of post-pandemic dress code, I think, which I talked about here. It's we have this really great opportunity to be what we often call it the comeback, right? So people are again leaving their front doors in a way that they didn't for 18 months. So in some ways, we kind of jokingly say, did we start the company 9 years too early, right? This is where the moment that we, and obviously we wouldn't do it any other way. And we have 9 years of practice now for this moment,
Right.
but in so many ways, this is the moment at which, if there's two kind of parts of any marketing journey, there's awareness and acquisition. The awareness battle was fought for us by people, working in sweatpants for the first time in mass in history, right? And all of a sudden realizing, God, I can so much more comfortable if I'm not wearing a really constricting, belt and a pair of, broadcloth trousers. All of a sudden, everybody realized that all at once, and now is out actively looking for a marketplace for a company who sells our clothing. And so in that way, that question is most simply answered by saying double down, right? This is when we'd embrace those tailwinds and try to capture that demand.
It's kind of like, it worked out well in disguise, because the initial few months and maybe the first 6 months were quite tough for the business and
Exactly.
for yourself. And now, because of the buying behavior changing, it's kind of this overnight 9 years of all the efforts coming to fruition.
That's exactly right. You're spot
on. And you've obviously thought a lot about the future of commerce and future of e-commerce now, post-COVID world. What does, in general, like customer buying behavior look like in this world after COVID? I'm not sure if there is any after COVID or with COVID, what's the right word? But in this generation after 2021, what does the customer buying behavior look like according to you?
Yeah, so there's so many answers I can give to this question. And I'll pick a couple that come to the top of mind. But people buying more pants. If you wore sweatpants for 18 months, now you're leaving your house again, that's probably an area of your wardrobe that you neglected. So we're certainly seeing that behavior pop up. But the number one thing I'd probably say is a lot of people planning for the unknown, which is a kind of a bit of an oxymoronic statement, right? So people that are actively prioritizing versatility in their wardrobe. So we often refer to it as kind of one closet theory, where instead of having your summer wardrobe, your winter wardrobe, your formal and your casual, all of that got put into one big box and said, I don't know, if I'll be inside or outside, walking or not, at a bus stop or on a train, in an office or at a coffee shop. I need one wardrobe that can solve all of that. And so we've started really building, and have now for 2 years actively building specifically with that closet theory in mind. And I've really seen a lot of folks really embracing this idea of in what I'm wearing today, I could show up to a board meeting or be out to dinner with friends or be laying on the couch, sitting on the couch and working. And in any of those settings, I would feel both presentable and comfortable. And if we can check both of those boxes, we've done our job.
Amazing. Just one last question from my side before we open it up for the attendees. If you were to start a new brand today, D2C, consumer-focused brand, like what would you do differently? Any key insights for the first time D2C founders in the audience today?
Yeah, my instinctual answer is not nothing, but I mean, there's so many micro things differently, but we've often joked and said, if you were to start a business today, this would be a pretty good choice, right? A clothing company who was based upon a new dress code emerging at a time when new dress code is emerging. And so with that in mind, the advice that I'd kind of pass out to the audience here would just be to say, we've often used this word tailwinds, right? Which is to find where the market is going and join it, and don't try to fight against it. Don't try to create a new behavior, but in kind of embracing those tailwinds, your job becomes a lot easier, right? If people are buying sweatpants, sell sweatpants. And to that end, I think anybody here who is considering starting a company or is already on that path, finding those natural behaviors that are building and playing into them rather than against them.
Would you still build an apparel tech company again if you were to? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, I'd also say kind of weighing in your own passions is a critical piece of it too, right? And saying, I can't imagine doing anything else. We often, again, I often say we started this company not because we wanted to start a company, but because we wanted this product, and this was the fastest way to get it. And so to that end, I think this is where our heart is, and we want to keep building it.
Amazing. Super inspiring answers, Aman. Let's take a few questions that are coming in from the audience. The first one is, how has marketing offline versus online impacted your business metrics?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, but now we just have the flagship store here. So all of our marketing tends to be digitally focused. It does manifest in store sales as well, although the store in total is maybe 4% of our overall business now, 3%. Is that if you see a digital ad and you happen to know that you pass the store on the street, they can play off each other. If you pass the store on the street and then you see a digital ad, you might click on it. And so all those impressions can contribute to the same journey. We have no incentives. Our staff is not incented by sales in the store. We don't care where you buy as long as it's whatever your preference is. But in general, we all of our for the vast majority of our marketing is done through digital, click-driven channels, and those store sales are kind of the cherry on top that can again contribute to or take from those channels as well. Good question.
All right. Next question is, do you think COVID is still impacting customer preferences, or has that wave already passed?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think the use of the word wave is itself implying that it is passing, right?
Passing, right.
And I think this is kind of our theory that what we're seeing now is actually here to stay, right? Kind of referring back to this one closet theory I shared earlier and saying this idea of prioritizing versatility, embracing, the fact that your day might start somewhere and end somewhere else, that you might see multiple settings in the same day. We don't think that's going to change anytime soon, right? I think if we kind of look at the average office, the average workplace, it's actually not, waiting for some unknown reopening date. It's embracing the idea of people being in different places at different times and coming together when they need to. So I think I'd question the kind of fundamental nature of the question. It's a really good question, but saying, is it a wave or is this the new normal? And those are two different things. I'd say we heavily suggest that the latter is the case, and we build around it.
All right. We have a question from Anamika. What were some of the supply chain challenges you faced during COVID? Because everything is shut down, I'm assuming, right? So, and how did you manage that?
Yeah, I think Victoria is asking the same question. I see it's a really good question. On one degree, we were lucky because we were back stock full because of slow sales. So we had some, good as demand started picking back up this summer and beyond. We were fortunate to be in a good position kind of compared to a lot of others who were sold out and kind of trying to recoup that stuff. It has had us, there's a lot more variability. So, we plan for a pull to launch in July. It might not launch until September. You kind of have to roll with the punches. The most devastating news for us was we have a heated jacket that we've released each of the last 2 years. And we're super excited to release it again this year. And unfortunately, with a shortage in microchips, the microchip shortage, much like the car industry, bit us as well. And so that jacket, you can look forward to it. It'll still come out in 2022, fall of 2022. You can look forward to that hitting the market.
So no heated jacket this year?
No, I know. It's a shame.
Were there upgrades coming in the jacket though?
Oh my goodness, yes, across them. It completely... everything, yes, across the board. Yes.
But does it come with a jetpack now?
You'll have to wait and see.
2022. All right. We have a couple of additional questions. If you could go back in time and prepare for something like COVID, would you do anything differently? Like if you knew somehow it's coming?
Yeah, we got a bit, I wouldn't say lucky, but we, as we kind of stepped back, and this was 2018 or so, Geraldo on our team kind of really promoted this idea of shifting away from the what, which was at the time kind of an office-oriented dress code. We called it performance professional, and shifting that to a why, which was the idea of using science to make things better. So kind of shifting that narrative. So in that way, that was 2 years before COVID. We were lucky to be really anchored deeply on this why and the use and the power of science to impact clothing and make it better. And so because of that, I think we were able to really build in that. If anything, I'd say if we could do anything differently, we would have that switch, in 2012 or 13, right? Instead of launching off the bat and say, it's not the combination of science and clothing, it's the power of science to drive clothing. That why, that purpose is what gave us permission in COVID to launch masks, to launch, blankets and gym clothes, right? That said, it's just about the use of science, not about a particular dress code, because overnight that dress code evaporated. And had we been tied even more deeply to that dress code, we may not be around today.
It's amazing. So you were prepared for if this were to happen. Of course, no one knew, right? If you knew, then a lot of people would have done a lot of things differently, but you were prepared in a way.
Yeah, we got a little bit lucky, and I think maybe my answer there would be saying maybe a little bit more.
Right. Um, have you had, we kind of like covered this in a bit, in some bits. Have you had success with affiliate marketing? How can early stage D2C startups use affiliates to grow sales?
Yeah, I think yeah, absolutely. We love it, and I would say the number one thing that I would kind of push folks on there is the authenticity of the platform, making sure that it is, not is, there's the kind of group of folks that have a purpose in the ecosystem, coupons, discounts, that kind of affiliate side. The affiliates that we tend to focus a lot more attention on is kind of content and authentic reviews. So absolutely, I think affiliate marketing can be extraordinarily powerful, with one huge caveat that it is generally authentically focused on your product, right? Not clickbait, not a discount, right? These things can also work in other ways too, and nothing against it. But I think in terms of the real power of it to acquire customers, which is I think your goal here, is that it has to be kind of authentically tied to the product.
Fair enough. Two more questions from the audience. One is, how important is branding for an early stage D2C company?
Yeah, I think critically important. And I think I'd come back to really the same last question, which is, and authentically tied to your product, right? That brand is really just a reflection of the product. It's how you tell that product story. And so I think it's just critically important that they tie nicely to each other. Beyond that, there's a pretty good playbook out there that seems to work well for most in terms of simplicity, user experience that even something as simple as Shopify off the rack themes can give you. That I wouldn't overthink it too early on, and certainly wouldn't make sure it doesn't outpace or overpromise on behalf of your product. But beyond that, I think there's not a ton of risk there.
Makes sense. Is the future of D2C exclusively digital or hybrid? And
such a good question. Yeah, I think it has to be, pending no future pandemics. I really have to think hybrid, and we've thought that since the start, and I think that really hasn't changed right now. I don't think it necessarily needs to be in the past. A lot of the dinosaurs of the industry that are even D2C are retail heavy. I don't think there's a correct proportion of online versus offline sales, but I do think that having both options is itself an advantage, right? That someone can experience the brand in two different ways, even through photography, right? By saying, here's a digital visit to our store. So I do think there's such power and differentiation in having both options, but I don't think there's a right answer there. I do think hybrid's the correct overall approach, but in terms of specific split, brand by brand. Yeah.
Makes sense. All right, we have one more for Leonard, from Leonard. How do you think about effectiveness or ROI of different channels like Google ads versus Instagram ads versus influencers, especially with channels that are harder to measure?
Yeah, there's two answers here. I'll give it to you, Leonard. One is there's sophisticated tools to address this exact question. I would push it to them. We've used some called Glue. There's one called Rockerbox. Obviously, Google Analytics has its own take. One's called Elevar. There's so many different ways that you can kind of go and find this attribution and give credit, to the channel that it is due. The second thing is to just trust the numbers that each channel is giving you and optimize those here, that looking apples to apples, right? So if Facebook is telling you have X, go for 1.1X, right? And that as long as you are improving, that's the most important thing. What we do to kind of combat everybody taking credit for every sale is look at cash on cash. And that's the number one piece of advice I have for any sort of return on investment, return on ad spend, is really just focusing on how much cash did the company bring in and how much did it spend on marketing. And if those two numbers can play nicely together, you're fine. Then continue to optimize within platform. But if you are trusting each platform's numbers, you're probably doing it wrong. But optimizing them is still a very good idea.
We have one question from Sandeep. What strategies do you adopt to retain customers in the D2C market?
Yeah, I think the number one strategy is a great product. We come back and say, the first sale is based on expectations. The second one is based on reality. For a customer to come back, it usually means they had a good first experience. Otherwise, they won't. So the number one place I'd say to invest to really improve retention rates are a better product, right? Now, beyond that, obviously, there's a great playbook of email, now SMS entering that mix, remarketing advertising and retention advertising. They can certainly do a lot of the lifting for you, but I would kind of give my X factor that answer is to say it's your product. And if you're seeing a leaky bucket or churn, the first place I'd look is back to what he's selling.
Have you had good success with SMS?
We're just starting now. Yeah, so far so good. Time will tell, right? I think we want to make sure we do it right. We do it respectfully. We don't oversaturate it. And I think it's still kind of new for everybody, including us and recipients. But So far, we're pleased
Yeah.
and excited, and we'll see how it pans out.
That's one of the other channels that we didn't talk about, but SMS is definitely something which is, I think, quite underestimated, but I've read a lot of case studies of how it's actually being used very well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll take one last question from Ayush. Have you seen any average purchase amount variance across channels? In other words, do some channels lead to bigger sales?
It's a good question. We'll tend to see a slightly higher AOV on retail historically. And I haven't actually looked, quite recently, but historically it's been true. I think you'll naturally just see people. And it's the bigger difference is we'll see a much lower return rate in retail. People are trying things on before they're buying it. They're seeing the product, they're touching it, stretching it. A lot of what can drive an online return, fabric didn't meet expectations or different than expected, or size didn't, right? And so you can kind of nail those two things down in person. So I'd say the bigger difference is probably AOV might be slightly higher in retail than online, but the actual net revenue is certainly, per person, per transaction is definitely better in retail, because people tend to keep what they get in retail, and online you'll face substantial return rates.
Makes sense. Just to cap this off, one final question. You may or may not want to answer this. Maybe you'll have to spell out some trade secrets, but what are some unconventional channels that have worked well for you that we didn't talk about, that is not SMS, email, retail, influencers, affiliates? If you would like to share at least one of them that has worked well for you, that other D2C companies can experiment and try if that works for them as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only one that comes to mind naturally is just kind of hand-to-hand combat. So getting out there, right? I think there's some loss of, like, we kind of look at these digital channels and we think about kind of ROAS and CPMs and CPCs, and I think there's still something to be said about one-on-one emails, one-on-one phone calls, appointments, pop-up shops, right? This idea of kind of hand-to-hand combat that still very much has a place, right? If you're building 1,000 new customers a year in hand-to-hand combat that are also then advocates, right? They're also telling all their friends that, hey, I spoke directly with the company. I had a wonderful person-to-person experience. I had a great 15-minute shopping appointment. That's probably a pretty good way to create an army of advocates. And I think it's something that we've done quite a bit of, and I cannot more highly recommend.
Amazing. So don't over-engineer it. Don't try to optimize all your channels. Try talk to people the old way, how people used to buy and sell before, is like show the product, like go out where your users are.
Yeah.
That's a great piece of advice. Thanks a lot, Aman. It was great having you on board. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure the audience has been super engaged. They've learned a lot. What we'll do is we'll recap this conversation, maybe make it like a small video that we can share it, maybe compile some notes and share it with the audience, share it with folks who have registered but couldn't join in. And that's pretty much it from my side. I'm surprised we just made it on time. Again, thanks a lot. It's great having you on board, and looking forward to staying in touch.
Hey, thanks so much. I appreciate you having me.
All right. Thanks everyone for your time as well. We'll keep running these webinars as part of the series we're running for D2C companies, founders, and marketers. So do look out on the next set of events that we run, and we'd love to have you on board again. All right. With that, have a great Wednesday or Thursday or wherever you are in the world. It's amazing to have you all on board. See you. Bye.